Greetings, I am Gresham's Adam, and welcome back to Gresham Reads Monster Blood Tattoo, Book 1, Foundling, by D.M. Cornish. So, in the previous chapter, Rossamünd and Fouracres had managed to return to the Harefoot Dig, and with some parting words to I believe she was a stewardess, or at the very least one of the owners of the Harefoot Dig. They had managed to board the retrieved Landelot and began their journey towards, where was it? High Vesting, that was it. Along the way, they had encountered, what were they called again? Let's see. Eekers, that was it. They had encountered Eekers who lived out in the wilds. Eekers, if you recall, are individuals who are rejected from society or left society, and are usually suspected of being Sedorners themselves, which only adds to the mistrust that individuals within society have. But whether or not they are, it's another matter entirely. The Eekers that Fouracres, Rossamünd, and Lady Europe had encountered were fairly friendly individuals that Fouracres himself knew, and had nothing but good things to say, which is pleasant to know. But either way, as time went on, they eventually made their way into into the final stretch of reaching High Vesting, where they saw the Groom, which was, I believe, effectively the bay. Or perhaps a gulf of sorts. Still, I'm curious to see where this will lead, as Rossamünd had been requested to head to High Vesting in the beginning of this story, in order to make way for his travels to become a lamplighter, though he was now conflicted with two ideologies, whether he wanted to be a lamplighter, which according to Fouracres is much more dangerous than Rossamünd had initially believed, or whether he wanted to stay as Europe's factotum, as she claimed him to be. But we will see what he does. Though, judging by the title of the next book, Lamplighter, I'm assuming Rossamünd goes with the Lamplighter option. But we'll see how this comes about. Anyways, enough rambling on. We will begin the chapter as per usual with the definition provided. This one provided is Frigate, a noun. Smallest of the dedicated fighting rams, usually having 20 or 24 guns down one broadside, guns broad. Nimble and fast, they are considered the eyes of the fleet, running messages, performing reconnaissance, and guarding the fleet's flanks. There are oversized frigates called heavy frigates, having up to 32 guns on one broadside. These are popular among pirates and privateers. So, it appears that ships are much larger in this than normal, than one would say in real life, because 20 to 24 guns, and that's considered a small ship, one meant for reconnaissance. A ship with that many guns in real life would be equivalent of a galleon or a battleship. So it is quite interesting that the smallest of fighting rams is so large. There must be some terrifying monsters in the waters. That must be enormous. But either way, it is time to move on. So let us begin with Chapter 14. An Old Friend Returns. Passage into the city had been easy. Fouracres had simply grinned at the gate wardens, said some pleasant words, and they had let them by with no more than a nod. Once beyond the gates, Rossamünd's head was swiveling left and right as he sought to see as much of this strange new place as possible. The buildings in high vesting were generally taller than those in Boschenberg, and made of a fine white stone, often with their foundations built of granite. Windows were taller, narrower, their panes rectangular rather than small diamonds. The streets, however, were wider and in better repair than those of Rossamünd's own city. Fouracres steered the landaulette nimbly through the throng of other vehicles. Wheelbarrows, sedan chairs, carts, wagons, coaches, and carriages as fine as Europe's, and some even finer. The smell of the groom wafted up every south-facing street, brought upon breezes of frosty air. Europe covered her nose and mouth with a gloved hand. As they went, Fouracres made arrangements. Now, what is it to be your destination here? Europe roused herself and spoke first. I need to attend the offices of Messrs. Ibdi and Abdi on Pontoon Way. Why? I think it's why, she said. Very well, the postman replied politely. And Rossamünd, you had mentioned something about Mr. Germanicus at the Harbor Grove. You can leave what he does and where he goes to me, postman. Europe interrupted with a scowl. You're my driver and you drive. He is my factotum, and even if only for now, he attends me. When I decide it is time, his needs shall be met. Till then, serve me. Rossamünd blinked. Fouracres scowled in return. Last I knew, madame, he, and most definitely I, worked for the Emperor. So till I make a declaration otherwise, you can keep your serve me's to yourself. I'm doing you a favor, and I'll see it through, but I ain't your servant by any more than common decency allows. Europe, her eyes slitted and glaring, looked as if she could say more, much more. But then she sagged and returned her blank stare at the passing scene. However you want it. Just drive, will you? Was all she said. The postman drove on while Rossamünd intently studied the right toe of his shoe, not daring to look up. They came to a great square, an enormous paved area cordoned off from traffic and filled with fountains and commemorative columns. At each corner was a massive statue of the Arius Vigilans, the vigilant ram, a heavily horned he-sheep in various poses of stout defiance or regal repose. These were the representative animal of Rossamünd's people, the Frigates, and seeing them so boldly displayed made him feel proud. Glamorous crowds filled the area, their energy and foreign costume a spectacle of its own. On the opposite side of this grand square was their destination, Messrs. Ibdi and Abdi, mercantile and supercargo, was situated in a lofty building of glossy pink stone. Its front was an almost windowless mass of giant pilasters, with an impressive door of dull brown bronze in their midst. Immediately above the door were two columns of windows, as narrow and tall as any other in the city. Rossamünd counted the windows by row. 13. He had never seen such a large structure, but from what he could gather, there were several about high vesting. As Fouracres stopped the landlord in the common courtyard before the office towers of Messrs. Ibdi and Abdi. Oh wait, I just realized I mispronounced that. Ibdi and Adbi. Okay. Rossamünd, unable to contain himself any longer, asked eagerly, "May I see the rams, Monsieur Rope? I might never get to see them ever again." Gulls coveted above. To the south, out over the Groom, great bales of pale yellow cloud boiled and piled up into the sky. Their flattened undersides were a dark and ominous green-gray. Europe looked at him, then to the postman, who shrugged and said, with a weary smile, "May I suggest this, miss, that I wait here with your fancy carrot while you do your dealing, and Rossamünd be allowed to have a peek about, aye?" With a sigh, Europe pointed to a big clock upon the facade of an equally large building across the square. It was easily visible, and Rossamünd had been taught his timings at the Marine Society. It was a little after the half hour of 2. "Be back here in 1.5 hours, not later," she allowed, sternly. I will. Rosamund's heart raced as he leapt down. About to dash off, he remembered that morning and skittered back, holding out his hand to help Europe alight. "Well done," she said with a wry look. "You are learning." He beamed with joy and hurried off. He had a smile for every person he passed. Elegant couples out for a doomsday stroll, stevedores bearing loads, striped shirt vinegaroons taking shore leave, flamboyantly wigged rams captain in gorgeous frock coats doing much the same, important-looking men stuffed into stiff, ludicrously high collars. I can speak, I promise. Talking unimportant things beneath feathered and furred thrice highs. How wonderfully strange it felt to have that little time of liberty in this gorgeously foreign city. With awe, he stepped through the great iron gates that split the mighty seawall and allowed access to the city from the piers and berths. The wall's foundations were blackened by century-long lapping of the bitter waters of the Groom. Along its lofty summit were batteries of cannon, catapult devices called tormentums, for throwing great smoke bombs of the most venomous repellent, and lambast, machines of war that flung spears dipped in various wicked poisons. As with all coastal cities, high vesting was in deadly earnest about keeping the cunning monsters of the deep away. Rossamünd skipped past the seawall and down a long stone pier way. It was intersected by many long, high wooden wharves and lined with many smaller craft. Some ironclad, with hulls of wood. So many vessels were there, with their clutter of tall masts, that walking among them was like moving through a strange forest. Out beyond all this, however, out in the deeper waters of the Mullhaven, were the rams. It was these mighty vessels of war that he wanted to see. It was upon these that he'd been expected to serve. At the end of the pier, moored on a low dock that went out to the right, he discovered a frigate. These were one of the smaller ocean-going rams, with a shallow enough draft to be this close to shore. It was about the length of a monitor, but sat much higher out of the water, so that it could survive the swell of the sea. Fascinated, he happily let his head swell with all the instruction he had received and reading he had done on them. He inspected the single row of ports out of which the cannon would be run, counted each one, 28 in all. He admired the graceful curve of the bow, which gave these warships their name as it ran out and down to the ram. He read the brass nameplate fixed to the forecastle. Surprise, it said. Rossamünd almost swooned. This vessel was famous. It was the fastest of its type in the whole navy, perhaps even the whole world. He had read of it in pamphlets and even been taught of it at Madame Opera's. It had served faithfully for over 100 years. Then his gaze fixed upon an enormous dark vessel out in the Mullhaven, a main sovereign. These were the largest of all the rams, and this one was absolutely gigantic, dwarfing all the vessels about. Its bow ram did not jut nearly so far as the frigates, for it was thought too big and too slow to successfully charge other vessels. It relied instead on its thick strakes, the iron plates that armored the hull, and the 2 decks of 120 great guns that armed either broadside. Rossamünd had always thought this an excellent number of cannon. It meant that for the main sovereign to fight effectively, she needed a crew of at least 1,400 men. Hello, Rosy Posy. The cry interrupted upon his technical romance. He knew that voice. Looking about, he found a face he recognized aboard the Surprise. It was a fellow foundling 2 years his senior who had shipped off to serve in the Navy 18 months ago. His name was Snarl. He was taller, broader, looked stronger, but it was still Snarl. While at Madame Opera's, he had been, after Gosling, one of the most active in tormenting Rossamünd. He looked up at his fellow foundling of old, squinting into the glare of sunlit clouds. "Oh, hello, Snarl," he returned coolly. It should have been an occasion of pride to learn that one of his old bunkmates was now serving aboard so renowned a ram, but the character of Snarl undid any feelings of such camaraderie. "Well, by and by, it's old Missy Boots himself, come to see me sitting high on me mighty boat." Snarl swaggered along the gangway to stand directly above Rossamünd. He called to his fellow crewmen, "Look here, lads, here's a fellow I grew up with." Some of the younger members of the crew looked down upon the foundling standing upon the pier. Some even gave him a genuine grin. Rossamünd smiled back cautiously. "As fine a grubbin as there ever was, this one, all manners and kindness," Snarl continued in his high-handed voice. "Got a girl's name to go with it, haven't you, Rossamünd?" Snarl had not changed. Rossamünd turned and walked back up the pier. "Goodbye, Snarl," he muttered. He stepped onto a wharf with the brash laughter of the fellow society boy ringing after him. Though he had only been away from his old life for less than a fortnight, it already felt like a long time ago. To meet another child from there, rather than bringing it all back, only made this feeling of dislocation stronger. He wondered if Snarl had leapt from the deck of a moving cromster, watched a lazar in a fight, thrown bother salts in the face of some grinlings, or dragged an ailing Fulgar to a weighhouse. Okay, kind of projecting a little bit there, I think. Or at the very least, feeling a bit cocky. Rossamünd marveled that he had seen and done more in the last 2 weeks on his own than in 2 years in the Foundlingery. For a while, he wandered about the many smaller craft berthed along either side, taking turns carelessly, trying hard not to brood upon this encounter. He had somehow thought that his fellow foundlings would all grow up once they had left the little world of Madame Opera's and become a little more sober, a little kinder. He approached the end of yet another wharf, the clock over the square still visible through all the masts. Rossamünd checked again as he had several times so far. It was time to return. He went to turn back when a powerful smell briefly overpowered the perfume of the groom. He knew that stink. Swine's lard. A firm hand cunningly pinched the back of his neck. "Well, what's this here then? An old chum returned to the fold?" It was Poundinch. The oily river master loomed over the boy. "Miss us, did you, Rosie, me lad?" Rossamünd went slack and pale with terror. A deep sinking terror that made him want to vomit. "Ah, look, he's gone all emotional. At such a happy reunion," purred Poundinch. Somehow, Rossamünd found his tongue. Hello, Rivermaster Poundinch." "Hello, Rosie, old boy. I'm called Captain Poundinch when I'm around these parts, though, so you'll need to reschool your tongue." The pressure upon Rossamünd's neck increased subtly, but so skillfully that he was compelled to step forward toward a gangplank before him. There she was, the hogshead, listing slightly to the aft laid-board quarter, but still very much intact. That was where the oh-so-familiar smell had come from. It would always be the smell of dread for Rossamünd. "How did you escape the monitors?" he somehow managed. "Ah, Rosie, me lad," Poundinch purred, tapping his greasy nose with a scarred and grubby forefinger of his free hand. "That's old Poundy's ways, slipperier than swine's lot me. Aren't you happy for me?" Was all the Foundling could offer. Poundinch pushed him up the gangplank and followed closely behind. Rossamünd thought briefly of leaping into the water, but he had been instructed over and over that the caustic waters of the Groom were no place for a person to find himself bobbing about. With that escape route unavailable, he found himself where he thought he would never be again, upon the deck of the Hogshead. Only Gibbon was here, no other crew. He was chewing his black fingernails as he stood by the splintered stump of the tiller. "Look here, Gibbon, the lad couldn't stay away. He missed us so." Poundinch kept shoving the Foundling all the way to the hatchway. Rossamünd pushed against each shove stubbornly. Gibbon peered dumbly at the Foundling for a moment, then his gaze sharpened. "Oh, I remember. Hello, boyo." Rossamünd kept his head down. He was too far away, he knew, for Fouracres or Europe to spy him. He reckoned also that at this less than salubrious end of the docks, other sailors would pay little heed to the subtle struggling taking place aboard the Hogshead. The hatchway was open, as it usually was, and with that cunning neck pinch, Poundinch forced the boy to start his way down the ladder. "Just going to finish up an old conversation with this son here," he called to Gibbon as he himself started down. Rossamünd descended slowly, his senses reacquainting themselves with the profound lack of light and the overwhelming stench. He could just make out that the hold had been cleared of all its barrels, yet the powerful odor of swine's lard had remained, soaked into the very wood of the Cromster's frames and decking, and with it the hint of some far worse fetor. Yet the smells were not all that had been left. A bright limb hung from a central beam about halfway between the ladder and the bow. It helped little, but was enough to show to Rossamünd's horror that the 3 gruesome crates bound with strong iron smuggled aboard about a week ago were still there. 2 of them were side by side near the ladder, and one on its own several feet away. This lonely one suddenly shook violently. Rossamünd gave a tight yelp. He tried to scamper back up, but Poundinch blocked his ascent. The captain shouted at the lonely crate, and after a few shudders more, it became still. The hold was otherwise empty, but for acerbic seawater leaking in from the stern end of the hold. Rossamünd saw that it was already about an inch deep at the bottom of the steps. "You know what's in these crates, don't you, lad?" Poundinch stopped about halfway down and cast his hefty shadow over the Foundling. No. Rossamünd spluttered and backed away from both Poundinch and the crates. The bilge water came up to his ankles now. "Oh, come now. You were snooping, listening, and prying after we took him aboard. Trying to get something over old Poundy, were you? A little morsel to sell to his enemies, eh? A little bit of leverage to make some deals?" The nature of this rogue's suspicion revealed, Rossamünd looked at him in disbelief. Poundinch descended all the way to the bottom. "Those innocent rabbit eyes you make don't work on me, mucky little mouse. I think I'll leave you down here to think again upon the falsities of your stubborn lying tongue. We'll be back to collect them crates in a couple of hours, so you'll have a bit of time to change the tune of your whistle." He grabbed Rossamünd by the wrist, twisting it cruelly. Tears started to well in the Foundling's eyes as he was compelled to squirm and bend in order to lessen the pain, movement which brought him right by 2 crates. "But I don't know anything. I just want to work as a lamplighter," Rossamünd howled over and over again. Captain Poundinch ignored him, and instead, quicker than a cat, gathered up Rosamund's hands and wound cord roughly all about them, fixing it to a loop of rope that held one of the crates together in such a way that it forced him to sit. The boy's heart froze. He had been tied right up against a crate. His mind went white blank with panic. But, was all he could manage. "Aye, but, you're babbling now, bain't you? Gotta make more sense if you wants your freedom, though." Poundinch put his greasy face next to Rossamund's. "You were so keen to know what were in me cargo. Well, now you can have a good old gander, as close as you could want for," he growled. "You got about 3 hours till I return. Plenty of time for you to mull. And if you're still whole enough to speak after such time with me pretty pieces here, we'll see what we might do with you. You never know, lad. If you're lucky, you might get to live at large on the vinegar waves with old Poundy as your ever faithful, ever vigilant captain." With that, and nothing more, Poundinch left, his boots thumping heavily back up the way he had come, the hatch closing with a clang. "I just want to be a lamplighter," the boy sobbed. The seat of his longshanks had already soaked in half an inch of water. He sat with his arms on his knees and his face buried in his sleeves. Overwhelmed with bitter hopelessness, Rossamünd wept as he never had in his whole life. Eventually, calm came. He stopped crying, and instead he listened. The hogshead creaked in the tidal movements. The brine in the hold slopped ever so quietly, and Rossamund's heart thumped. But that was all. He lifted his head and squinted about, his face puffy, stinging. It was very dim, but because of the bright limb, not so dark that the crates could not be distinguished clearly. Though he was overshadowed by the box he was bound to, his eyes adjusted to the weak light that also came from the cracks about the hatchway. That was my page holder. My finger accidentally flicked and I knocked it down. Okay, let's see. Where was I? There we go. There were not even the slightest hint of movement from any of the 3 crates. Not even the one that shook so determinedly before. Rossamünd had been making all the noise he liked, but still the things they contained had remained still. They must have been empty after all. Eyeing the gaps in the crate next to him, his mind whirled. He would be missed, surely. Not by your rope, perhaps, but certainly by Fouracres. He'd come to the rescue. Rossamünd was sure of it. Wouldn't he? Yet doubt took hold, and he could not be certain of anything anymore. He was lost. How would they know where to find him? If Master Friendstart was aware of what happened to him, he knew his old dormitory master would be furious and shift all obstacles to rescue him. But Master Friendstart did not know, and he was too far away to help. Rossamünd rolled his eyes in his grief, and his gaze caught a glimpse of something between the slats of the crate to which he was tied. Two eyes stared back at him, yellow and inhumanely round. Rossamünd shrieked like a person touched with madness, and tugged and writhed wildly in his bonds. The crate jerked violently too, and the eyes disappeared. In blind panic, he wrestled for his very life to get free. It was all in vain. The knot he was bound with was a bailiff's shank, a cunning tangle that took 2 hands to tie, but 3 to undo. He barely had a whole hand of fingers available between the 2 of them. Surrendering to whatever grisly fate he was now to suffer, some horrible gashing end, as Master Friendstart would say, Rossamünd bowed his head and began once more to weep, waiting for some flash of pain or other rending violence. Instead, a sound came. It was a voice, small, soft, and bubbling, like a happy little runnel. "Look at you," it said. "Look at you, strange little one who can cry. No need for this crying. No need for crying now. No. Freckle is here, and here he is. Early he might be, but not the least. A friend he is, and friendly too. So no crying now. No. No screaming, nor throwing, nor pumping of poor Freckle in his head about this little jail." Despite himself, Rossamünd felt calmed and reluctantly turned his head. The round yellow eyes had returned and were looking at him again, earnestly kind. The Foundling held his breath. The eyes seemed to hesitate too. Then the voice that belonged to those eyes, that small, soft, babbling voice, said, "He is watching too, and knows you. Oh yes. Fret not. There is always a plan. Providence provides. You'll see. Who are you?" Rossamünd managed at last. He could see little else but those big eyes. Maybe a small nose. He could not be sure. "Why, I thought I said. Or did I say I thought?" The eyes blinked, a long, almost lazy blink. "Why, I am Freckle. Freckle, who has been speaking all his thinking just now. I was afraid before, and I thought before that I would just think all my speaking, and see what manner of strange little one you were. But I know now by your crying what you are, and now I have no fear." Though he could not see, Rossamünd could well imagine this little creature smiling a rather self-satisfied smile. "Tell, little crier, what is your name?" It's Rossamünd." There was a strange gaggling noise, and Rossamünd had the impression that this was Freckles' laugh. "I see, and see I do. An obvious name. Here is a tree. I'll call it tree. Here is a dog. I'll call it dog. Very clever. What a witty fellow who gave it to you. You must be a funny fellow indeed." There was more of the gaggling laugh. I was about to say laughter. Rossamünd frowned. Witty and funny were not words he would have associated with Madame Oprah, who had fixed his name by writing it in the ledger. Why is my name so obvious?" the Foundling pressed. "Ah, your name is obvious by your weepy tears, little Rossamünd. That is all, nothing more." This little fellow was very hard to understand. "And now we're done with our meetings," it concluded. "I expect you've learned that its hands are shook together to show a meeting met." A hand came out from the lower gap in the wood. This hand was about the same size as Rossamünd's, though the fingers were longer. the wrist much thinner and the skin far rougher. Rossamünd gulped at it. This was most definitely not a person's hand. He remembered himself, took it in his own grasp, and politely shook. It felt warm, and very much like the bark of a tree. Its grip was strong, but gentle. Looking into those bizarre yellow eyes, Rossamünd tried to show trustworthiness and friendship in his own. If he had to suffer imprisonment and oppression, then getting a chance to make friends with a kindly boggle was an odd yet amazing consolation. "Very pleased to meet you, Mr. Freckle," he said solemnly. Abuzz with curiosity, he could not help but go on and ask, "Excuse me, Mr. Freckle, but are you a Nuglung?" Freckle laughed again. "I thought you divide and conquer too, I see. By rule of division, divide by rules. The everyman's creed. Ah, 'tis only fair. I named you first." The eyes blinked again. "As it is, you make me much bigger than my boots. No. A Nugling princeling I am not. I am just what I am, what every man might go calling a glamourgorn. Though, really, I am just one lonely Freckle. There is no other Freckle, just this one Freckle, until he is no more." The eyes looked skyward. Rossamünd had seen a Nuglung earlier that day, the sparrowling in the olive bush. Now he was actually talking with a Glamgorn, which is what he understood Freckle to mean by a glamourgorn. These were even smaller than Nuglung, less powerful. Again, he remembered the almanac's warning that it was best not to get too close to one. Well, he wondered, what would the writers of Master Matthias's wandering almanac say if they were watching me now? "Give it to me," hissed a new and broken voice. Rossamünd startled. The yellow eyes of Freckle blinked several times rapidly. The new voice had come from the lonely crate on the steerboard side of the hold. "Quiet, you! Give it to me, too." The broken voice came again, full of creepy, lugubrious longings. "Hand to me. We want to suck out its marrow. Oh, yes, and squish its eyeballs between our rotted teeth." The crate from which it spoke rattled vigorously. Rossamünd peered at it. A hunched darkness thrashed about spasmodically within. Fortunately, its cage was chained fast to a thick oak beam. And on the page in between chained and fast to a thick oak beam, there is a sketch labeled "The Reverman." It's something behind a barrier of planks. More than likely the cage is trapped within. There's a ghastly mouth and two digits of a hand. Nevertheless, he shuddered and began to pry at the lashings that gripped his wrist. Freckle's voice became commanding and hard, contrary to his normal soft sing-song. "His marrow is too well kneaded inside his bones, and his eyes are too busy at looking and weeping to need your gnawings." The Glamgorn's golden eyes disappeared. "Now to quiet with you." His voice spoke from the other side of its box. There was a thwip and a curse and an extraordinarily loud hiss from the lonely crate. "That struck us in the eye! Now we must have an eye for an eye, an eye, lovely eye." Rotten lips smacked together. "I know it did, and this I know, for it was sent on its mission so," Freckles said proudly. "And even less eyes you will have if you don't be leaving us be." There was another loud hiss. "You'd not be so brave if you weren't bound so hard, scrumptious morsel. We planned to chew on your twiggy bones, too. Oh my, and me too. It became quiet. Freckles' yellow eyes reappeared. What is that? Rossamünd whispered, still picking uselessly at the rope. That is an ill-mannered reverman, all bits and bobs and falling apart. Those wicked ones who made him do not know their wicked business. He's not knit too well at all, and none too sharp in the knitted noggin neither. Oh, how he hates, full of grieving over half-memories and wild hungers. They hate we natural ones most of all, 'cause we were made all right, and they are made the everyman's way, all wrong. A reverman. A revenant. Wait, that's a revenant? Okay. Rossamünd knew of these things. They were put together by wicked people taking bits of dead bodies to make new creatures from them, all rotting limbs and ravenous. So that was Poundinch's secret trade, the reason for his suspicious conversations and the crazed flight from the spindle. At last, Rossamünd had discovered the truth. Rivermaster, or captain if that was how it was to be now, Poundinch was a smuggler for the dark trades, a trafficker of corpses and half-made undead. That was why he pretended to haul such odoriferous cargoes as swine-lard and pungent herbs, to hide the stink of the contraband. The Foundling shuddered once more. He had to get away. The hold of the hogshead had now taken on a greater aspect of foul wickedness. Had it not, it still held a reverman. Rossamünd did not care how poorly made it might have been. He did not like the idea of being confined so closely with one. Its rotten reek was beginning to overpower the other rancid airs in the hold, even that of the swine's lord. Cut me loose, he hissed to Freckle. I have a knife still, hanging on my baldric. See? Yes, I most definitely do see, and see I do. There was a tug on Rossamünd's scabbard, yet my own hands are not enough to do a knife's work. Hemp and wool are one thing, Rossamünd, but iron just another. I can loose your bonds, but mine I cannot, unless you have learned your strength as well. The Foundling frowned. He was not strong enough. What was the Glamgorn talking about? His hopes dimmed, and he sat for a time in a gloom. Gradually, he became aware that his bottom was beginning to sting, as if he were being bitten by 1,000 little ants. Ow! Ow! Rossamünd realized he was experiencing the caustic nature of seawater for the first time. He had been sitting in the bilge water long enough for it to start to eat at his skin. He stood up as best he could, the rope bindings preventing him from achieving more than an awkward stoop. His backside stung. A wicked strained giggle came from the lone crate. Not good for clothes, nor delicate pink skin. Oh wait, that was the wrong voice, sorry. Not good for clothes, nor delicate pink skin either, was observed Freckle, ignoring the riverman's malicious glee. That's why I like my barky hide. It hides me better from sneaky eyes and stops the stinging of the water. I wish I had your skin, Rossamünd agreed with a sagacious nod. Sagacious? But just on my rear end. Wanting to pick up a previous thought, he continued, Mr. Freckle, which Nuglung do you serve? Freckle sniffed in a breath. My, there's an everyman question if ever a question was one. No prying into private things. I've not asked you your private things, and you shouldn't go asking upon my private things. You've taught you far too well. I can well see too well. Rossamünd hung his head in shame. Somehow it made sense that this Glamgorn would not want to be telling an everyman child, even one as friendly and open as Rossamünd hoped he was being, much of secret boggle ways. The Foundling was certain that if he were a boggle, he would not want to say a great deal to a person either, not unless he knew without a doubt that the person could be trusted. He apologized to the mother, but pressed on to another mystery. Please, at least tell me why my crying means you know my name. The Glamgorn laughed, his strange laugh. Knowing. Sometimes there has to be trusting, too. Freckles' golden eyes frowned, then became kindly once again. I can see you ain't ready, and I know there's time and a place and a time. I might be lowly, but even I know what to say and when not to say it. Yet the time might come for knowing things, and when the need of knowing's nigh, you'll know then what I do now. This was no help at all. Rossamünd wanted to push for more when there came the familiar thumping of bootsteps on the deck above. What now? Rossamünd quickly became quiet, and the Glamgorn's eyes retreated into the obscurity of his prison. Rossamünd followed the steps as they thudded overhead and trod toward the hatch. It opened, and Captain Poundinch peered down, his attention darting to each crate before stopping upon the Foundling. Well, Rosie, me lad, I see you're still in whole pieces, he grinned leeringly. I've come back sooner than I said, I know, but I figured you'll do your thinking just as well upon me other tub, the frigate Cockerill, as here. You'll like her. She's a mite more spacious than the poor old Ogshead. He waggled a short-barreled pistola hidden beneath his coattails. Eyeing the firelock with fright, Rossamünd saw that the barrel was wider than usual, a weapon designed to knock a person down, to bludgeon him to death despite any type of proofing. And I reckon this might serve as the best gag for a little stint to the cockerel. No hollerin's or screechings from me, and there'll be no shootings from me. Poundinch released the knot that held Rossamünd's wrist to Freckles' crate and jerked the Foundling after him and back up the ladder. So follow me lead, and a simple jaunt from here to there is all for you and me to enjoy. Rossamünd strained his neck to try for a glimpse of Freckle. The Glamgorn's now sad eyes showed briefly. Farewell, the Foundling mouthed, just as he was hefted clear of the ladder by the easy might of the lumbering captain. He caught one last sight of Freckle blinking a solitary sorrow-filled blink. Interesting. So, revenants are a thing, but rather than being spirits of revenge, they are effectively Frankenstein's monsters in a sense. Sorry, I was stretching. It's certainly interesting. I'm curious to see what's going to happen next. I imagine Europe will come looking for him, more than likely to scold him for being late. Ooh, excuse me. But I do wonder when or if she or Fouracres will even notice. No, either way, I'll think on it another time. Darkus needs the computer, so I will be hopping off. So I thank you all for joining me for this chapter. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like and a comment down below with any thoughts and opinions on this chapter. And also make sure to share the video around and subscribe to the channel while ringing the notification bell to be alerted whenever a new video is uploaded. In the meantime, I will see you all in the next chapter. I am Gresham's et al., and I do hope you have a pleasant day.